Hello, hello. Welcome to the stream, everybody. Uh, I did patch up the map from last time because the border gore was too much for me to deal with. It just looked Spain, France, and Italy all looked disgusting, and I cleaned up Eastern Europe too. I mean, I'm not really playing around in Europe. This was just for my own aesthetic purposes. So, where we left off, we had just started colonizing the New World. My goal for tonight is to expand into South Africa and continue with my colonization of the Americas. I know, this is a mod I found. It is so much better than the gray color that Prussia used to be. I think the mod is just called Blue Prussia, something like that. But whoever decided to make Prussia that disgusting gray, yeah, yuck. Wait, is Parliament not working? Okay, there it goes. I will take that merchant, thank you very much. There we go. And let me check on the estates. I haven't interacted with them for a while. I can see some land there. There we go. And you need to get to exploring. Okay, nothing new to explore. What's this? Oh, they have a new symbol for unassigned merchant. Well, you go to the Gulf of St. Lawrence and do your thing. Yeah, no, and then if you form Italy, you just get more green in that area. So it's like there is a considerable risk to a player forming Italy, which has an almost identical color to the Ottomans, and they're right next to each other. Meanwhile, you just use this gross gray color for Prussia, which historically wore dark blue uniforms. It's something. Yeah, I'll fund an investor. I'm England. I got the money. No, I'm just avoiding the continent. I think Sweden is my ally. Yeah, I've got Sweden. That's it. I'm not messing around in Europe too much. No, I don't want it. I should royal marry Sweden though. If they can form Scandinavia, that will be a very useful ally for keeping the rest of Europe in check. I think I did when they got declared on. Yep, they got declared on by I think it might have been one of these North African states, and I just didn't want to deal with them. So, yeah, let's enforce the Pope's will. We're doing a Catholic England run. Call him back. And do I have the range for South Africa? I do not, but I should probably try to get something along the coast here. And I'm gonna need to send some men there because the natives will just slaughter my dudes. So let's build our first colonial force. And I am running another mod that I really enjoy for colonial playthroughs, where it gives the developed nations, like the European nations, different uniforms for their men when they send them to Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Want to get to South Africa because I can use that as a jumping off point for Australia and India. So, starting with Sierra Leone, we will slowly work our way down to South Africa and then start colonizing the Pacific. At some point, I'm going to be going to war with Spain over Gibraltar and some of their Caribbean territories. That is a fun one, but um, my preferred colonialization, or my favorite preferred colonial mod, is one that changes the names of all of these provinces to fit whichever culture colonizes them. Let's help them, and well, our quartermaster screwed up. Let's get some education for the poor going on. So some cultures will do that, but only if they're colonizing in the regions they did historically. So this mod, which is called New World Colony Names, it makes it so that every province in the Americas has names for whether for any culture that takes it over. They even have like Turkish names for them if you want to do colonial Ottomans. All right, so we don't get more naval attrition. Get those guys in there. All right, that is taken care of. So we got a foothold in Africa. So we just got to beat the Portuguese to the Cape. And I am so glad I cleaned up this map. It looked disgusting at the end of the last stream. And also, Two Sicilies has such a nice color. If they form Italy, I'm going to be sad to see that go. Let's see what we can build. Oh, and this is another mod I highly recommend. It allows you to build a road network, which is like it gives you a minor bonus, but it's nice for like role playing. Oh, um, I think I have a national color mod on. Can't remember. Also, this is a thick Ragusa. Yeah, try again, try again. Try not to burn all the sheep this time. Burgers. Let me see if I can take the loans from them. That'll work. Trade that 4% loan for some 1%. Apparently so. They have been taking advantage of the Ottoman independence guarantee. Because Hungary can't get at them right yet. And I mean, Serbia did pretty well. I think the Ottomans wound up fighting a coalition early on, and they lost a bunch of land in the Balkans. Okay, what can I get these guys to do? That's true. Um, though honestly, the Ottomans have been so weak lately. Ever since the Emperor patch, the Ottomans have just kind of been a shadow of what they used to be. And the Mamluks have honestly been way stronger. Also, we got ivory as a trade good. Nice. I also have Europe. Oh, and I'm gonna have to go to war with Portugal over Bermuda at some point. How are we doing on technology? Still ahead on most, so I'm gonna take that next idea and get the tech cost. Can probably take the next exploration too. Get that discipline buff going. There we go. Perfect. See, my main goal right now is just beating Portugal down to the Cape. Though I do think they are friends. Yeah, they're friends with Spain, so I might be able to take what I want from Portugal as well as grabbing Gibraltar in one war, which would be pretty cool. Let's get our fleet in here. Start building them back up. At least merge all of our heavy ships into one. What is England without its wall of wood, anyway? And we're losing money. It's just because we got a bunch of colonies going at once, so I'll just let that go. It's not much money anyway. Okay, so what won at Trent? That would be an interesting Catholic Church right there. Free colonist. See if we can grab. How far down can we go? Alright, Ivory Coast is as far as we can go. Need more African trade posts. So now that I got a pretty solid foothold in the Americas, and I don't really have to worry about the Spaniards going after this now, I can really focus on moving east. There we go. Finished a mission. Oh, and I am running with missions expanded on. That would be one hell of an event, and it would be much more historically accurate because in the few games where I actually see the Ottomans eat the Mamluks like they used to, that was not how it went. Historically, when the Ottomans decided to conquer the Mamluks, they basically took them over in one big go. So that would be a very historically accurate mod, although given the mechanics of EU4, That would probably throw it in very out of balance, even more so than it already is. Sweden's looking pretty thick. They might actually form Scandinavia. Is Norway independent? They are. But they're friends with Brandenburg, which could be a problem for Sweden. Then again, Brandenburg no longer has Prussian ideas, so they ain't what they used to be. Still, though, we might get to see Gustavus Adolphus's dream of a Swedish Mare Nostrum up here. They'll sacrifice the manpower for professionalism. And I'm not going to war anytime soon. At least not any big wars that I can't just use my superior technology to nuke with. Yeah, I'm not restricting them. Yeah, we're helping. We're helping. What is going on? Okay, merchant. Oh, we must have gotten. Yeah, so I want Ivory Coast. I think I just sent them to do it. Well, true, but for the Swedes, it would have been their C or our C. But yeah, no. Gustavus Adolphus had dreams of controlling the entirety of the Baltic, the whole coastline. And that is one of the interesting what ifs, is what if the Swedish Empire had been more than a flash in the pan? Because they did pretty well for quite a while, but ultimately they didn't have the staying power of the other like big continental players, largely due to population. Um, Put bluntly, Sweden just can't sustain the same sort of population that a France or an England were able to. So it was much harder for them to fight toe to toe, especially once the Russians got their shit together after the time of troubles. And the Swedes and the Russians had a lot of the same geopolitical interests. And when it came right down to it, Sweden just could not compete with the Russians. And we grabbed the Cape. So not entirely historically accurate here, but I don't think we'll have to deal with the Netherlands because Burgundy is still going kind of strong. And yeah, so we might not see an actual Netherlands in this game. Come on, just hold on like a week or so. There you go. And that is ours. Alright, so the Indian Ocean and Pacific should be open to us now. I haven't started doing that yet. Um, Mostly focusing on the coastline, but I should probably send somebody, shouldn't I? Trying to tack up. And alright, so I think we're good in Africa right now. So returning to the Americas, let's continue down the American coasts. That is true, there are some nice events there. And I did talk a few streams ago about myth and history, and someone brought up El Dorado, and that is a very good thing to bring up because El Dorado was something that a lot of the Europeans believed existed, and they operated on the idea that it did. So that's kind of what drove a lot of the early efforts to explore inland, especially because the Spaniards had already found so much gold and silver and other precious metals. Most of the other Europeans were after that exact same thing. Yeah, let's sell some indulgences. Sounds like a bad idea. Got some money. Let's see what we can build. Get some of those going. But yeah, so the other European powers basically saw what the Spaniards had discovered in Mesoamerica, and they wanted some. The only problem is that when the English and French settled in North America, there's not nearly as much gold up here. So when they figured out it wouldn't be easy money in the same way the Spaniards had gotten a hold of it, they had to actually work to turn a profit. And actually, several of the early efforts um, in what later became the United States failed completely. Um, Jamestown almost failed a couple of times before they found out tobacco grows really well in Virginia. And at some point, the Plymouth colony was reduced to like half of its number. And had it not been for Native Americans teaching them farming methods, it probably would not have seen through its first or second. I think it was its second winter. So in the British colonies, it was largely the tobacco and other agricultural surplus that the region could produce. For the French, it was the furs, and it allowed them to kind of challenge the Russian domination of the fur trade. And holy shit, what's going on there? Speaking of Russia, that's ugly. Well, they're not losing that bad. So, oh, and the Swedes are. I think this is it for Denmark. Yeah, I don't see they get. I don't think they get out of this one alive. So we might get to see Scandinavia, which I rarely will see the AI form. Um, so that is kind of what happened historically. So, New Providence, in particular, one of the islands of the Bahamas, exists in a sea so shallow. Also, yeah, I can get to that in a second. But the shallows around New Providence were impossible for British and Spanish ships to get at. So a lot of pirates who usually operated with smaller vessels set up there because it was impossible for the larger warships to get at them. And it kind of became a safe haven. And they did actually have a semi functional pirate republic going on there. So I guess that's one way of putting them in the game. But they didn't control all of this land. They operated on the island of Nassau, um, and that was about it. They didn't like have true sovereign territory. But yeah, the cotton trade was another thing that really spurred the growth of the American colonies, particularly in the South. Um, and actually, during the American Civil War, it was one of the things that the South thought they could leverage over the British to get their support in the war. But they grossly overplayed their hand and didn't count on the fact that the British already controlled India, which could also grow cotton just fine. So they didn't need southern cotton, and they didn't have to risk fighting with the Union just to protect their cotton. So they didn't, and the Confederates were left on their own. So they definitely overplayed their hand there. It was a kind of a dumb move to think that the British couldn't get access to, and Egypt, which was another important source of it. Um, but yeah, so it was rather foolish of the Confederates to think that just because they were one of the main exporters of cotton, that an empire the size of England couldn't get access to it from another large cotton growing region. The great irony being that England had abolished slavery at that point, um, at least in the chattel form of slavery. But many Indians working on British cotton plantations were little more than slaves. They weren't technically owned by the British, but their conditions weren't that much better than actual slaves. I'll take that free admin power. But the Confederates also hoped for French intervention as well. They'd really hoped that the British would want their old colonies back, or at least want influence over them. And sure, there were probably some in Britain that did, but at that point, they had already found that their African and East Asian and in Asian holdings were far more valuable than the North American colonies had ever been. And you got to figure the British didn't want to get involved in that quagmire because a lot of the Europeans did send military observers to watch the Civil War, and most of them thought it was a complete and utter shit show. So, not many of the European powers wanted to get involved in that mess. Though, if they had actually bothered to learn a few lessons from it, World War One. Also, yeah, no, I wasn't. I wasn't even getting into. The South could never have won the war. The only reason they did so well for the first few years is because the North didn't have competent leadership in charge of its considerable resource edge. Um, McClellan was not a particularly good general, and he was completely outmatched by both Lee and Stonewall Jackson, who used what the South had with considerable efficacy. But once the North put actual competent leadership in charge, it was all over. Because no matter how hard the South tried, they weren't going to be able to outproduce. Also, yeah, I'm being diplomatic, but McClellan was horrible. He was an incredibly ineffective general, and he got a lot of good men killed. So it was a meeting of, and I think that Lee and Jackson were both incredibly effective commanders, um, but they did not have anywhere near the resources that the North did. They had, yeah, pretty much, but they had less in the way of, they had a smaller population, a smaller industrial base, and much less infrastructure. If you look at a railroad map of the North and South during the war, the North had like 3 or 4 times the railroads that the South did. So they were more easily able to move their men to the front. Also, yeah, Grant knew how to use what he had. Um, Grant was Grant was one of the best generals in American history, at least from a strategic standpoint. Yeah, the North also had naval superiority, which is something that usually gets underestimated in discussions of the Civil War. But yeah, they were able to tighten the rope pretty tight around the South's neck using their blockade. So they prevented the South from getting its hands on the manufactured goods that it needed, that it was importing from places like Europe. Where was I? What I was saying is, in the Civil War, you see the rise of some pretty modern tactics, all things considered. So, with the conical bullet, Napoleonic warfare goes completely out the window. Napoleonic warfare and sort of prior firearms based wars, yeah. Um, that only worked when your muskets had piss poor accuracy. Now, your average musket of, say, the American Revolutionary era only hit like 1 in 30 bullets accurately. That's why they had to line up and fire them in a big row. It was the only effective way to use them. But with the advent of the mini ball, you have the guns get so much more accurate. It's a smoothbore musket firing a mini ball has like 1 in 5 accuracy, which is bad if you're just lining up and shooting at each other. So that's actually part of why the casualties for the Civil War were so high. Is it was new technology meeting out of date tactics. And it turns out if you're shooting muskets at each other at that range and they have reasonable accuracy, a lot of good men are going to die for no good reason. So what you see by the end of the Civil War is both the Union and the Confederacy start using smaller squad tactics, more mobile warfare, and it sort of predicts a lot of the developments that occurred during World War One by about a half century. And I probably should. Hmm. I'll take the naval maintenance. But yeah, so where was I? So a lot of the European observers who came to the Americas to watch the war, they thought it was little more than just dirty colonials shooting at each other with squirrel guns. They really underestimated what it represented for the future of warfare, which was nothing short of a complete and utter revolution and a sea change from what it had been during the Napoleonic era. That's why you have like lancers charging into battle in World War One, heads full of very outdated ideas about the sort of nobility of cavalry warfare, who promptly got slaughtered by machine gun fire. Did France grab this? That's weird. Never seen them do that. So if I can colonize most of the South African coast, I can probably cockblock a lot of the rest of Europe from getting at Asia for a little while. So, early in the war, a lot of European armies thought it would be over by Christmas. They thought it would be a quick war. What they hadn't counted on was those developments I mentioned from during the Civil War met another particularly nasty development that the British had encountered in the Boer War, which were trenches. What they hadn't, yeah. So it was they all wanted it to be over, but they didn't want the other side to win because by that point the war had just gotten so brutal. Any peace would have devastated the losing party, as we saw with Germany. Also, yeah, particularly if you look at events like the Bleeding of Kansas and bushwhackers out in the West, those were sort of semi state affiliated actors attacking civilians. Because what a lot of people don't understand is that there was sort of a demographic war going on between the North and the South. The South wanted to export as many pro slavery people as it could into the Western territories, and the North wanted to export as many abolitionists as they could into those areas. Because at this point, it was basically a war between, for every slave state that got admitted to the Union, they needed to admit a free state and vice versa. So there were, if you go out west, there were a lot of pro-slavery people and a lot of anti-slavery people, and in the build-up to the Civil War, they were at each other's throats. But yeah, so everybody in Europe wanted the war to be over quickly, but it quickly became clear that that would not be the case. And all sides dug in using new trench warfare techniques for the long haul, which, as we know, lasted until 1918, almost 1919. Also, I was aware that there was a significant debate over slavery in Texas, but I don't know my Texas history as well as I would like. Huh, that would have been interesting and it would have brought the war to an end real quick. Because the Confederates would have had to fight on two fronts in that case. Civil War is interesting for me as someone who lives in Maryland because I my state was like right on the line between the two, and Maryland was almost a Confederate state. The main reason it went for the Union was because Lincoln marched some men into Baltimore to make sure it stayed Union. Because if the Confederates had gotten Baltimore and Maryland with it, um, D.C. would have been completely cut off. So there's a fort in Baltimore called Fort McHenry that I've written about before, but it once defended the city from a British invasion in the War of 1812. But during the Civil War, its guns were turned towards Baltimore in case the city revolted in an attempt to join the Confederacy. Maryland was also the only state with units on both sides of the war. There was a Confederate cavalry unit and a Union infantry unit, both from Maryland. And you can still see that in Maryland today. The state is really two or three put together. Yeah, Virginia did literally split in half over the issue. Yep, yep. He wrote it from the deck of a British warship that he was being held prisoner on. Though it didn't become the proper national anthem for a while. I believe it was the 1930s when it became the official national anthem. And America had a bunch of patriotic songs that it was sort of using before that. But I want to say it was in the 1930s when. What is the Dutch interpretation of the flag? I mean, I know I'm biased here, but I am a big fan of the American flag. Bit more unique than like the more common like tricolors and the like. I said like entirely too many times in that last sentence. Because what they teach you in American schools, I can't remember what the colors mean exactly. Um, I believe the red is like the blood of the patriots who fought for the country. I want to say that the white is peace, and I can't remember what the blue is supposed to stand for. Huh. That does sound like a cool story, but no, the American flag is somewhat borrowed from the British East India Company, but it's the 13 stripes represent the 13 original colonies, and the stars have changed throughout American history as new states have been added. One of the, I believe it was when we were at like 25 or 26 states, we arranged them in the shape of a star. I like that one. But originally it was 13 stripes, 13 stars on the Betsy Ross flag. And we kept the circle for a little while. Like the Union used a circle, but once we started really moving past the East Coast, we needed more stars. And I know there are some people I know like you can still find some of the old 48 star flags because Alaska and Hawaii were the two most recently admitted, and that was pretty recent. I want to say it was around the time of World War II. So there are still some 48 star flags out there. Right. Thank you for that. So yeah, 59. But I have a buddy who goes to a lot of estate sales, and he's come across a handful of the 48 star flags. Honestly, that's the biggest argument against admitting more states, because you'd have to change the flags. Yeah, they'd have to change the flag. Although I don't know if that even can happen, because DC constitutionally can't become a state. So they would need to do a constitutional amendment if they wanted that to happen. And I don't think in this Congress you're getting 60 votes. Or 66. No. Yeah. Yeah, no, you need a supermajority to change an amendment. And given the state the country's in, I don't think you're going to get that. Yeah, it's two-thirds. But yeah, I don't think you're going to get that in America as it is right now. I don't even think you'd have all of the Democrats on board for it. I guarantee you Joe Manchin would oppose. But I've also seen an argument for yeah, the U.S. has a okay, yeah. So I don't think DC statehood is happening anytime soon. But yeah, so I believe that is true. I know the British just had a tendency of adopting different people's flags and adding the Union Jack to the upper canton. Yeah, that and then Puerto Rican statehood is the other one I see talked about most, but I don't think that'll happen for much the same reason. I honestly think you would see existing states split apart. They do. But I think you would see existing states split apart before you saw entirely new states admitted to the Union. Because Texas actually has it in its state constitution that it's allowed to split into five states, which is one of those weird little caveats that you still find in the American legal code. Yeah, that is the other thing is that's not really a question that's been talked about, but I mean West Virginia did break off of Virginia, so you do have precedent for that happening. True, I'm just saying it's like if you're there would definitely have to be a Supreme Court battle over it, I think. But I still think that is more likely what you would see rather than entirely new states getting admitted at this point. That's just my opinion. I'm not an expert on U.S. history. My specialty was East Asia. I gotcha. Yeah, no, you learn about the entirety of the Indian Ocean in one go. But we've got access to India now. We just gotta kind of leapfrog our way over. Need a new explorer because the old one died. I am not looking to move anytime soon. I actually just got a place in the Baltimore area. I'm pretty attached. Maryland's home. Never known any other state. So I'm sticking around. I gotcha. I do know that a lot of people are getting out of New York and California in particular. And I think both New York and California lost a congressional district because of it, which that'll be interesting to see whose districts get deleted. I mean, it probably will be. The exodus from both states hasn't slowed down at all. I think California just recorded its first net population loss in its entire history as a state. Yeah, it's we are in some weird times, friends. It is a strange time to be alive. I say that as someone who studied a lot of strange times to have been alive. I gotcha. Yeah, no, I know there was a massive exodus, particularly from California to Texas. Yeah, and that's why that there's it's. I think you would see the country collapse before you saw things like that happening. I do know this. It is strange to watch this happening. I don't even know what Texas would look like what the individual constituent states would look like if it split. If I did relocate, um, probably be Florida or the Californias or Carolinas. I'm pretty attached to the East Coast. All my family's here. Grew up here. Honestly, that is one thing that I really enjoy about Maryland. You get a little bit of everything. It's not like a heavily urbanized state. As soon as you move out from Baltimore and Annapolis, it's pretty rural. You've got mountains, you've got beaches. It's geographically a very pretty state, in my opinion. We've got a little bit of Appalachia, a little bit of the coastal plain. Baltimore is a disaster, but it kind of breaks my heart. I grew up around it, and it has its bright spots, but there's a lot more to Maryland than Baltimore, and it's gotten worse since then. I assure you. But there is a lot more to Maryland than Baltimore, and it is a nice state on the whole. Nice free currency reform. Baltimore has been in a rough spot really since the 70s, 80s. Yeah. Um, it is a city that has had incompetent leadership for decades, and they're entrenched, and they're almost impossible to get rid of. There are nice parts of Baltimore, particularly if you go south to like Canton and Fed Hill, but yeah, most of the city is a real shit show, and it's sad because it has so much potential. I mean, it's in a prime position for a port, and a big part of the problem is it got hit very hard by deindustrialization. right around the in Maryland, one of the biggest industries was shipbuilding, and it had a serious boom during World War II. But when those industries kind of dried up, Baltimore started going downhill, and it's had its ups and downs, but it's mostly been down since then. But there was a brief period when it was the United States' second largest city behind only New York. Yeah, that's the kind of things you see that just make you sad being down there. It's sort of like that relative that you have a certain amount of affection for, and you just really want them to get your shit to get their shit together, but you're losing hope that it will. Oh no, like I before the whole COVID pandemic, I would commute into the city, and I walked through a little park, and there were always these two heroin addicts passed out on a bench. And it's if you ever get the chance to see some of the prettier parts of Baltimore, do, because the glory is faded, but it's still there, and you can still see it. Like, the Basilica is gorgeous. It has some spectacular museums, and the Walters Art Gallery is beautiful. And it's familiar, and I don't know. I have a lot of fond memories of Baltimore. Yeah, it's a bit. I would say it's almost like New York in the '70s. It is a city that has very fallen very far from its former glory, and I think it can get there again. It just needs someone competent in charge. And I mean, there's a lot of Marylanders who feel the same way that I do. Yeah, no, it's tragic to watch what's happened to Baltimore because it used to be like the cultural hub of Maryland. And I mean, there's still some cool culture there. There's a shout out to Chesapeake Shakespeare Company. I love going to see shows there. Well, I did love going to see shows there, and COVID hasn't helped the situation. But actually, funny you should mention Detroit. In college, one of my favorite professors was from Detroit, and we often joked that the only people who understand Baltimore are like from Detroit and St. Louis and other cities like it. Because where I went to school, we had a lot of kids from New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania come down, and they didn't quite understand Baltimore or the affection that a lot of Marylanders have for it. But he got it because he still loved Detroit. Just wished it would get its shit together. It's a lot of American cities are suffering from the same problem that like Detroit and Baltimore are. It's deindustrialization hit them, and they didn't have the competent leadership they needed to actually sort of rework what they did. They got so used to doing one thing, couldn't do anything else. Yeah. Um, that I believe goes back to the. Yeah, no, the British did not were not particularly imaginative with their names. I mean, so the prime example being, well, Virginia is probably the weirdest one. So Virginia is called Virginia on account of Elizabeth the First. So why isn't it called Elizabethia or like Tudorburg or something like that? Well, it's because she was a virgin. So we named the state after her sexual purity, which is bizarre, but that is what Virginia means. It's the state of the Virgin, referring specifically to the Virgin Queen Elizabeth the First. Why would I accept an alliance from Denmark at this point? And the thing is, when the British got there, it wasn't Newfoundland. The Vikings had gotten there first. Actually, Iceland was completely uninhabited before the Vikings arrived. There were no human settlements there except for some, like a handful of Celtic monasteries, people who had come up from Ireland and decided to recreate Christ's wandering in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights just in the frozen wastelands of the North Atlantic. I did a couple episodes on the Vikings and I talk about it. But the first breeding population in Iceland was left by Norwegian explorers. Alright, printing press just showed up. Alright, I'm a bit ahead on most things. I have never been to Detroit, so I have no frame of reference for that. Yeah, that was one of the finest pieces of propaganda ever. Alright, got all those level 2s. That just sounds soul crushingly depressing to see. There are spots in Baltimore like that. Area around like Greenmount Cemetery is a prime example. Greenmount itself is a gorgeous historical graveyard. It's just the neighborhood around it is in such a dire state. Yeah, I mean, and I mean, I'm somebody who has studied a good amount of local history, and Baltimore is even more depressing if you know what it used to be. Baltimore's golden age was the 1880s to about the 1940s, and it's been downhill since. But if you know what it was in its golden age, it's even more depressing. I mean, it used to be one of America's great cultural hubs, and one of the most important cities on the East Coast, and now it's it's in a bad way and is sort of in DC's orbit. Yeah, the riots also hit Baltimore. Didn't do it any favors. But what really started killing Baltimore was the loss of industry. Baltimore is a city that thrived on what it made, and once it stopped making things, the city stopped thriving. I mean, there are a number of apartment buildings in Baltimore in particular that used to be like factories and warehouses. I knew that Detroit's golden age was relatively short, but Baltimore was important for a while. Like, I mean, in some of my studies of local history, that we had multiple presidents that came here to visit, advisors and sort of people in their social circles that lived in Baltimore. Theodore Marburg is a prime example. Nobody's ever heard of him, but I learned about him doing a lot of study for local history, and he was a fascinating guy who was a personal friend and advisor to Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, and Woodrow Wilson. And he also edited speeches and press releases from FDR. Baltimore guy through and through. Child of German immigrants who came in the 1860s and 70s. And I know in Detroit it was the auto industry that really made it take off. Yeah. Really, it's cities like Baltimore, Detroit, St. Louis are just kind of a microcosm of the same issues that are affecting the country at large. I don't know, and I'm somebody who has studied. I mean, right now I'm studying the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, and there are way too many parallels for me to be comfortable between what was going on then and what's going on now. I mean, that was America's industrial heartland, and when we stopped making things, all of those cities fell on hard times. I mean, they don't call it the Rust Belt for nothing. A bit of both, honestly. We a lot of similar problems facing both right now. The optimist in me wants to say we'll see him through, but the realist slash pessimist in me knows that these sort of issues have been the death of many civilizations before us. Um, Maybe not tonight. I think Friday. Friday, I can definitely do it. I kind of managed to get this save running with all the mods, and I'm honestly surprised it has lasted for as long as it did because I tried running this with the mods and it crashed several times during personal games. Yeah, I would wager. Aka, that there are a lot of Americans that could tell you the same story for their local city. Also, that is it's not a specific Sicilian flag mod. It is a sort of bigger um, flag mod pack. Someone went through a while back and clipped my mod list. If you watch that, you can see everything that I'm using. Let's execute him. Howdy, welcome to the stream. We were just we were talking about an incredibly not depressing topic of the decay and death of American cities, particularly on the East Coast and Midwest. Sure thing. So right now I've got Sweden as an ally. I've got some colonies in the New World, and I'm sort of starting to expand out east. I've got the Cape and a few footholds in Africa. It is 1552. There we go. Players. There you go. But yeah, watch having a front row seat to the decline of American cities is depressing. I'm trying to do a mostly historical England. I want to do a bit better than they did historically. Hardest country I've played. Um, Prussia. I have done several Prussia games. It is one of the most RNG dependent uh, nations to get right. You need a lot of things to work out well for you, or you got to restart your run. Because you do get really strong. I usually start with Brandenburg because I like having the Hohenzollern dynasty. It makes my future German empire. I do. I have Sierra Leone and the Ivory Coast. I just needed a foothold, and the Portuguese have grabbed these provinces here. No, Prussia is a lot of fun to play. They are just very difficult to get a run off the ground with. And the Italian miners, I find, are no walk in the park either. Also, because of the aggressive expansion in northern Italy, if you go even a little bit too fast, you're fighting a coalition. Nice. Also, yeah, um, Prussia is one of the few countries that can like eat coalitions for breakfast. One of the others being France. France is one of the most fun countries to play. So if you're doing Muscovy, you definitely need Third Rome for them to be like peak fun. But Brandenburg was one of the first games that I played all the way through, and I wound up conquering pretty much the entirety of Western Europe. It was a lot of fun. You know, it's something you got do a Prussia game at least once. It is fun to see like a stack of 20,000 men destroy like 100,000 stack with discipline left or with morale left to spare. It is so satisfying to watch. That is true. Although it was also a bit more cultured than a lot of people like to give them credit for. They do. The guaranteed three military skill is so nice. But I believe it was. I'm blanking on the French philosopher's name, but it started with an M, and he said that Prussia was Athens in the or Sparta in the morning and Athens in the afternoon. Because Frederick the Great was the very image of a philosopher king. I mean, they might. Honestly, if my colonies really take off, I might switch this to a U.S. run. Just manifest destiny my way across the entire New World. And of course, we're already rolling in money because England. Yeah, Mirabeau, that was it. Um, yeah, Sparta in the morning, Athens in the afternoon. Because believe it or not, for as effective a general as he was, for as badass as he was, Frederick the Great was a renowned flutist and philosopher. He actually wrote a bunch of pieces that are still played today. Also, yes. Yeah, no, that's I mean that's kind of how it went down historically. But yeah, actually, there's one of my favorite quotes from Frederick the Great is, "You can have all the pretty girls of Berlin. I prefer the company of tall soldiers." And he also opted to be buried with his dogs instead of his wife. I've been to his palace, his summer palace, Sans Souci in. Yeah, no, he was buried with he had two greyhounds that he absolutely adored. I believe they were greyhounds that he adored, and he was buried with them. And I've been to his summer palace, which is gorgeous, and you can tell he was a major Francophile. It looks like a miniature Versailles, right down to the gardens. I mean, basically, yeah. He was a really interesting guy, considering that he basically took what amounted to kind of a backwater of a kingdom and turned it into a continental powerhouse. Because Prussia really was just kind of a small backwater relative to even other German states. But he almost single handedly turned it into a powerhouse. It was also one of those situations where it was a good father followed by a great son. That would have been interesting. That's basically what I just did in this run. But so Frederick the Great's father was a bit like Philip of Macedon. He built much of the army that his son would reform and use to conquer the rest of the world, basically. Yeah. It was because Philip II doesn't get enough credit either. Philip II built the world beating army that Alexander used to conquer the world. I'm also going to send my transport fleet back to England because it's time to conquer a couple of native tribes that are in my way. And I need to build up my army a little bit. But if you ever get I mean, yeah, that basically was the Sarissa Pike was remarkably simple but remarkably effective. It was just a really, really, really long spear. But if any of you ever get the chance to go visit Potsdam, definitely check out Frederick the Great's Summer Palace. It is gorgeous. Let's see if we can find a picture of it for you. Here it is. It is a remarkably gorgeous building. And I mean, you can see the French influence here, but it's also not nearly as crowded as Versailles, which makes it a lot more fun to tour. Like, I've been to Versailles, and it was incredibly beautiful to see. It was just so packed with people. Like, the Hall of Mirrors in particular, there wasn't enough room to like extend your elbows out. But yeah, check it out. It's in Potsdam. It is definitely worth seeing. Granted, that was a really fun trip that I did a while back. I got to see a bunch of World War II sites, and the main reason we were in Potsdam was to see where the Potsdam Conference happened. But we also saw a few other things like Sanssouci. Um, we also saw some Cold War stuff in East Germany, which was cool. Though I will say, Versailles is not overhyped at all. It is every bit as gorgeous as you think it's going to be, and then some. It's just crowded. And it was cool that our tour guide for that section was a local. Like, so she knew the area and knew what was going on, and she showed us some cool little spots in the towns surrounding the palace. Also, that is England in a nutshell. Also, the entire kingdom probably could have powered the country by how quickly he was spinning in his grave, considering that he almost single handedly BTFO'd the Russians with a fraction of their army. Well, one of the great ironies of Frederick the Great's sexuality is that Hitler idolized the guy. So I don't know if he knew. I wouldn't have wanted to be the guy that told Hitler that his idol was gay, but yeah, no, he was that much of a Giga Chad. But no, I always thought it was kind of funny that Hitler idolized him, given the fact that he was gay, and probably would have hated. Yeah, Frederick the Great was gay, um, based on all the evidence that we have. So he was married, he was, but he was never particularly attached to his wife. He wasn't cruel to her or anything, but they never produced any children. He didn't sleep with her. He chose to be buried with his dogs. When he was young, he tried to run off with his English tutor, which his father did not like even a little bit. So yeah, he was, and then he chose to be buried with his dogs rather than his wife, and he wound up, and actually, yeah, the tutor was beheaded for that. He also was very close to his sister. Um, she was like one of his best friends throughout his life, and it was her son that he wound up leaving the kingdom to. It was his nephew. But actually, when he lost her, he was all out of sorts for a very long time. Very nice, sweetheart. That is a good song. But where was I? So yeah, it was interesting that again Hitler idolized the guy as like a. He was not celibate. He was definitely not celibate, but he was gay. I got to imagine there were a few things that led up to him almost running away with that English tutor. And one of his quotes that is kind of funny in retrospect is he said, "You can have all the pretty girls of Berlin. I prefer the company of tall soldiers." So we know he had a type too. Um, but yeah, he was a fascinating guy. He was also a personal friend of a lot of very interesting figures from the period, like Voltaire. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason he was like the model of a modern philosopher king. He might have done. Um, but no, he Voltaire, Mirabeau, a bunch of French philosophers were in his like personal circle, and he was also a very talented musician. Believe it or not, he was an expert flute player, and he composed several pieces that his army played while marching into battle. There was a fantastic documentary I watched about him a while ago. Let me see if I can find it for you. I think this is the one. Yep, here it is. So this is a fantastic documentary on Frederick the Great that I thoroughly recommend. Also, he did that too. But check this one out. This is a very good documentary specifically about him and his reign over Prussia. I do troll YouTube looking for good history documentaries. So if I find anything good about something that we end up talking about here, I will. I have never tried a Ryukyu run. I almost always will play in Europe. Though I do know that's one of those meme states like Ulm. Also, Japan formed. That's something. Manchu's looking pretty thick. Be interested to see if they form Qing. All right, free colonist. I have not. Because I tend to like doing historical runs. I don't think I'd have much fun with the Sweden or as a Switzerland because actually, you know what? You know what's harder than Brandenburg? Sweden. Sweden is a painful run to get off the ground. Though I have done a few where I wound up conquering pretty much all of the Baltic coast and forming Scandinavia. Sweden is a really hard run to get off the ground because you start off as a junior partner of Denmark. You got to break out from that. Your lands are poor and very difficult to develop. That would be fun. Maybe when I'm done this England run, I'll do one like that. Commonwealth is also looking pretty beefy. They must have taken some land from Russia. They did. Look at them go. I think Russia might be done. Yeah, that is the only good province in Sweden, but it is a rough start. Like, you have some decent ideas, so once you get going, you can usually do pretty well. The issue is getting going. Yeah, no, Mongol is a very hard empire to form. I am aware of that one. They're one of those ones where it is interesting how much of an influence they have on world history, despite how relatively short a period of time they were actually around. Oh, I can just vassalize them. That's fine. Oh shit, that is not good. Use the support loyalists. So yeah, I can just expand through vassalization. That's fine. Save me from having to ship all my men over. That shouldn't be Spanish Canada. Let me. No, that's a native tribe. No, right now I have a. I mean, basically, yeah. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if I saw an independent Scotland and a unified Ireland in my lifetime. Hmm. No, let me take that money. But yeah, God only knows what the situation in the UK is going to look like down the line. Where would the? I mean, modern economies, you don't really need to have that much land, and Scotland's pretty well developed for what it is. They would probably wind up joining the EU. Yeah. Same thing with Northern Ireland. They'd probably just rejoin with Ireland, and well, then they'd probably become like one of the smaller states in the EU, like a Belgium or a Holland or Netherlands. Also, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if I saw the EU disintegrate in my lifetime too. Um, hmm. I mean, they did try to leave the UK a few years back, and the resolution almost passed, if memory serves. I just know that it is because it's definite that the UK is leaving the EU for good. Um, there are a lot of people in Scotland who don't like that. Also, yeah, we might see an independent Quebec. Canada's also in a very weird place lately. That said, I don't even know if Ireland would want control of Northern Ireland because there are a lot of people in Northern Ireland who are just as opposed to joining Ireland as the IRA was to them being part of the UK. I think things are going to get weird, and I think we're all in for a very interesting ride over the rest of this century. I think by 2100, the world map will look completely different. You do have a lot more internal separatism with both of those states. Um, this will be a very trying century for all the powers of the last century. I mean, it already has been, but I think the world will be looking very different come 2100. In all likelihood, I'll be gone by then, but realistically, given how long my relatives have lived, I can probably expect to last to like 2070s. Also, I honestly think you would probably see Italy leave before you saw the French leave. Honestly, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw China have at least a short-lived period of rapid imperialism. And North Korea is basically a vassal state of China. Yeah, Eastern Europe is also probably one of the more likely places where you would see a split from the EU, particularly the countries that form a Visegrad group. That is Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, and Czechia, which actually changed its name from the Czech Republic to Czechia in, I believe, 2012. And that is another thing. You might see Russia just absorb Belarus and parts of the Ukraine over the next century. It is a odd time to be alive. That much is for sure. There's an old Chinese saying that goes something along the line of "May you live in interesting times," and it's one of those things that's supposed to sound like a blessing at first, but when you think about it, it's actually a curse. And that was what it was intended as. There were a few like more boring periods in human history. There's, I believe it was one year in the 16th century where like nothing of consequence happened. I have seen Canada form once or twice. True, I think it's just going to be a case of we're going to see war happening where it hasn't happened in a very long time. But no, I've seen Canada form on its own. I've never seen Australia or Louisiana. I have seen Vermont. I have seen Vermont happen. Also, yeah. Um, though the weird thing is it's proxy wars because the U.S. is still standing. Um, NATO is still standing, although I think it's a little bit shaky these days. So Russia's got its hands tied in Western Europe right now. And note, I'm saying right now. It's who knows what it's going to look like 10 years from now. Uh, a collapse can happen to any country. Um, and it hasn't happened to the US yet, but I do think there is actually a Siberian separatist movement. But the US is on a road to destabilization. So we might be able to pull ourselves out of it, we might not. But the only thing anyone can really do is watch. I mean, the Romans didn't think their nation would fall either, but it did. Nobody ever thinks their nation can fall. Right, but we kind of have gotten by. The U.S. has gotten a lot of lucky breaks throughout its past, and I hope that luck holds out. I really, really do. But there's a distinct possibility that it won't. Yeah, just who knows what's going to happen? You can never predict the future. I am generally optimistic about the U.S.'s future. I think it's going to be rough for a little while, but we have pulled ourselves out of every other issue we've been through. Yeah. Um, Honestly, I would think it would look much more like the breakup of Yugoslavia than the breakup of Czechoslovakia. I don't know. I was born in the 1990s, and I do remember the 1990s, and I have studied the 1990s too, just in retrospect, and it was mostly it was way more stable than it is these days. This is honestly, I mean, my parents were around for the 60s and 70s, and both of them think this is worse than they remember from when they were kids. Maybe not on a federal scale, but I think in the case of like an economic collapse, you would see a lot of people blaming their neighbors who looked different because that's usually what happens. And yeah, I honestly do think it would be much more ideological than ethnic. Because right now in the US, you have an extreme left and an extreme right, and both of them fucking hate each other more than anything else in this world. The main bodies of the parties, sure, but both of them have very strong, sort of far movements on either side that are very different from one another. And libertarians, centrists, anybody else who falls under the broad liberal banner is just kind of watching those idiots. And yeah, that for the main body of the Republican and Democratic parties, that's true. But once you move out of that main body of the parties, you have rather strong extremist factions in both. And yeah, the main problem is neither the Republicans nor the Democrats have done a very good job of actually representing the people they claim to represent for the past several decades. Oh, no, no, I'm not. The neocon and neoliberal branches of both parties, those guys are pretty close to one another. There's really no appreciable difference between neocons and neolibs. But there is a fascist group and there is a communist group, and those are the ones that I'm worried about. Because historically, it hasn't taken that large of a number of communists or fascists to do a lot of damage. It's the mono party has lost the faith of a lot of the American people, and many of them have turned to extremists on both ends of the political spectrum. And honestly, a large part of it is the mono party's own fault. Most of them have been bought and sold by corporate interests and God only knows who else. I honestly think everyone just needs to fucking chill out, but I don't think that's what's gonna happen. There are a lot of things we need to change to actually avoid these problems. A new Teddy Roosevelt would be good. Honestly, I think our best hope is to re-federalize. Part of our problem is the federal government. Yeah, the federal government has gotten way more powerful than it was ever meant to be in the Constitution. The only way a country the size of America's size and diversity, the only way that kind of a country survives is if you let California be California and you let Texas be Texas. Because if both of those states have to fight over the same government that gets to have a lot of authority over both of them, then it will get nasty. But if the federal government doesn't have that much control over what California and Texas do internally, then they can both coexist peacefully in the same country. The way the founders originally intended this place to work was that each state was almost a semi independent country. Also, Calvin Coolidge, one of the most underrated presidents of the 20th century, does not get enough credit. But honestly, given how shitty every president of the 21st century has been, I would take a Teddy Roosevelt. Coolidge is definitely up there for me. Um, I also like Eisenhower. Lincoln, of course. Who else? I think Kennedy is very underrated. One good president of the 21st century. Really? It's slim pickings. They were all shit, really. Warmongers who just kind of ignored the country's problems largely. Well, the real problem is They're loved by half the country, hated by the other half of the country. I honestly can't. It's a young century, so I'm hoping we get better from here. But most of America's best presidents, I would say, were from the 18th and 19th centuries. 20th century, we had a couple good ones, but a lot of the 20th century presidents were also complete and utter shit. It's just the federal government didn't used to be this powerful, so they were kept from doing a lot of their really stupid ideas. Yeah, no, we have been led by idiots for the past 20 years. I would wager even farther. Clinton wasn't lighting the world on fire either. Most loved recent president, that's for damn sure. I honestly think Kennedy is really underrated, and it would have been very interesting to see what he would have done with two full terms. Also, yes, it's almost impressive how how little they give a shit about how the economy works. It's clear that none of our presidents of the 21st century have ever cracked open an economics textbook. Or, even just had a maybe like read through Wall Street bets while drunk. That would give you a better interpretation of how the economy do than what any of these idiots have had. It's both. It really is both. The reason the presidency has gotten so powerful is because Congress is such a fucking shit show and has been for a very long time. When Congress doesn't do its job, you see an imperial presidency, and that's precisely what we're seeing now. Because for the past several years, Congress has done absolutely fuck all, and it has created an imperial presidency. There's a reason that pretty much every president of the 21st century has ruled through executive order. It's because Congress isn't doing its fucking job. Look at Sicily go. They're taking over North Africa. And also, I don't. Hmm? Yeah, I don't think. I don't think there was anything stop. No, there was no stopping China turning Asia into its playground, especially with how internally divided the U.S. is. China's getting. Would there even be any of his genetics left? Maybe from his skeleton. I'd say him or a Kennedy. We need someone who will go after the banks, and a trust buster would be good too. Oh, I know. I'm just saying, very few presidents of the modern era have done anything to hinder China either. That'll work. But no, I honestly think a new Kennedy would help immensely. China has always been sort of a cursory threat. It's just only in about the last half century or so have they built up the economic base to really be a problem. And a big part of that problem is we decided to manufacture fucking everything there. And it's not just it's the US and Europe has decided to build everything in China, and that basically allowed them to get us by the economic short ones. And now they make so much stuff that is so important to the modern way of life that there's no doing without it, really. So now they're a very significant threat, but one that is very difficult for US and European leaders to actually. I mean, it is a very tough situation. And it is the economic situation has made it very hard for American and European leaders to actually deal with China because they have them by the balls, basically. And also, yes, and then China, ironically, is outsourcing a lot of its own economic need to Africa. China is basically colonizing Eastern Africa, and nobody's talking about it because it has a lot of the resources they need to continue their domination, and it has an easily exploitable labor force, which China very much likes. So Western leaders are between a rock and a hard place with China, really. Um, I don't think I have. I haven't seen any of his videos in a while, but I might have to check it out. I just know that, well, if any of you are familiar with the historical problem of the Thucydides trap, we're walking right into it again. It's when a rising power meets an established power. And almost every time it is that a rising power and an established power have met each other and like kind of interacted, they've gone to war. Also, that sounds very interesting. I might have to check that out, definitely. Um, but it's the most recent examples were the world wars, where the rising power, Germany, did battle with the established power, really the Anglo French domination of the world. Did it twice, and it was the two most destructive wars in human history. But that was the Thucydides trap in action. And now we're seeing it again with the rising power China interacting with the established power of the US. And typically, when the Thucydides trap plays out, nothing good happens. But Mexico and the U.S. That is the tale of two colonies right there. Because our histories are relatively similar to one another. Just trying to vassalize these guys. Okay, what else can I do? really didn't do anything. I guess I just gotta wait. Also, yeah, no, they inherited a much worse form of government than the US got. I could. I could do that. Let me look into it. Like, you want me to do like a watch and react? I am familiar with him. I did watch him a while ago, but I just kind of lost track of what he was up to. Cool. So I think maybe next weekend I will do a Crown stream. I need to do some research on his more recent videos so I can figure out which ones I'd like to do reactions to. Hmm. Yeah, I watched during his like 10-minute video era, and then I just kind of lost track of him. I know he went on hiatus for a while. That was about when I stopped watching. The last video I remember from him was his video on the years of lead, which was fascinating. Don't think I've seen one since. I will see if I can schedule that. Things are getting very busy for me lately because I have three weddings to go to next month, and I am involved in one of them, and I'm one of the groomsmen, and I'm going to be moving in with my girlfriend over the next month. So it is a busy time, so I will see what I can do. I might not be able to do a 3 to 4 hour block, but I could probably do like a 2 hour one. So yeah, let me do some research and I will talk about it on the next Friday stream and we'll go from there. And my computer is kind of chugging a little bit, which is unusual because this is a pretty new machine. I got the top of the line one, so probably just getting hot. Oh yeah, it's running hot. Yeah, it is running hot. All right, now the southern part of the U.S. is making me a lot more money than the northern part, mostly because I'm trying to expand through vassalization to save the admin points. It does usually run pretty well on a Mac, for me at least. I think it's just chugging right now because it's been running high temp for a little while. The main issue with Mac hardware is the heat extraction is not particularly good. So it's particularly hot in Baltimore right now. So my computer is running pretty warm. It runs faster in the winter, actually. Yeah, so the main problem is all the heat vents are in the back and they're relatively small. So it has a lot of heat that it needs to push out of a very small space. The main reason I get Macs is because I worked on one for many years and I just got very used to the OS. So I know it like the back of my hand. It's what I'm comfortable with. Again, because I worked on it. It was what my office used. So I just got very familiar with Macs. Especially because I've it's been very nice having it during the last year because I've been working from home during all of it. So it's been nice being able to work from an OS. I know because my work computer was a PC, and I could use it. I know a lot more shortcuts and everything with Macs. But no, a lot of Paradox games run fine for me. But this is a top of the line MacBook. I decided to spoil myself for my birthday this year or last year. And I needed a new one because my old one was running on its last legs and really inadequate for what I was doing with the podcast. But the extra horsepower this thing has is what's allowed me to start doing video episodes. Because I don't think I would be able to put together those videos on my old machine because this one will run pretty warm using the video editing software I have been. Almost got all of South Africa under my control. Came with a free gold mine, which is nice. Once I got control of South Africa, though, I am gonna really start. Oh, son of a bitch! Kilwa is going to Australia, so that means that's where I'm going. Nobody's taken Australia out from under me. That is rightful British clay. Damn it! That is very cursed. You are correct. It is really hard to conquer, but I feel as England, I have to try. Where even is Kilwa? Th- Okay, so they're a one province state. Yeah, no. By comparison, yeah. Alright, but at least Kilwa's one province, so it should be pretty easy to deal with them once I get a foothold in Australia. The problem with India is that it takes you a fair amount of time to actually get over there and establish a foothold. So by the time you actually get there, you have to move fast, and you're usually already dealing with some established powers. Yeah, so it looks like well, the Mughals formed. I think that's the first time I've ever seen the AI actually do that. And it looks like they're a remnant of the Timurids. Yeah, there are almost always four large states you get to deal with. Though usually it's Delhi, not the Mughals. But almost always you got to deal with a strong Bahamanis and Vijayanagar, which makes me giggle every time I think about it. And then Bengal is usually pretty thick as well. The other problem is it takes you forever to actually send colonists to the Pacific. What mission did I finish? No, Ivory Coast. Nice. Got oh, I got a level 3 trade center? Where did that happen? Yeah, no. They made India almost impossible to conquer the whole of. Like there are just so many provinces in it now. It is very difficult to actually absorb the whole thing, especially if you want to do a historical British Raj, because you got to get more than just India. You got to get all of Pakistan as well and Bangladesh, Cape Colony, and Chart India, and we got James Cook. So send him to explore. Yeah, that would be nice. I wish there were more options for colonization aside from just straight conquest. That would make it a much more historical way to play. Because it wasn't always just straight up hardcore conquest. There was a bit more nuance to how it was done, particularly by the English and the Dutch. They did, but their initial footholds were gained by buying large parts of the country. Most of the wars they fought, um, yeah, most of the wars they fought were when they started expanding inland. And after the dissolution of the British East India Company, and when it became the sort of crown colony of England, that's when they really started fighting for it, because that's when the proper British army could get involved. Before that, it was sort of the company's army. Also, yeah, because a lot of how the British conquered India was they used smaller vassal states to do so. They used a lot of smaller nobility who were not overly fond of their current overlords. And they used them to get into it, basically. They used them to establish a foothold and push into the country. Which is historically what the British did, and they were usually pretty good at it. They would use existing power structures wherever they could. So when the British took over Africa, they used a lot of native rulers who essentially became vassals of the British crown. I mean, the Spaniards did the same thing too. The Spaniards, when they conquered the New World, um, they basically just co opted the existing power structures that the Inca and the Aztec already had and just replaced the Inca and Aztec at the top. That would be interesting. There is certainly a more nuanced way that you could do European influence in India. I do think they need to update the colonization system. Um, that should probably be the next one because we've gotten continental Europe reformed with the HRE, and now we've got most of Asia taken care of. I think colonization needs a serious overhaul because it's such a big part of the game and one that has changed relatively little since the beginning. I've been playing EU4 roughly since like 2014, 2015. That would also be very interesting if you could use your trade companies as vassals. But that might make them a bit too overpowered. Still, though, nothing's more overpowered than Russia after the third Rome patch. So who knows? It would be very interesting to see. I would honestly really like to see that. Again, colonization is one of those things that really needs a reform, and that would be a really cool idea. Because that's usually how it went down. Usually, it was the crowns of these countries revoked the rights of these companies and absorbed them into the empire proper. Yeah, that's the only way you can do it. And even then, if they start catching up to you technology wise, good luck. The Mamluks are looking pretty beefy. Ming is just doing what Ming always does, just kind of sitting there, chilling. Yeah, and then if you have to deal with rebels on the home front, you are completely boned. And even then, you really can't try doing any of that big expansion until you've completed quantity ideas, because England's army just is not big enough. Apparently, we got a bunch of Norwegians hanging out in Edinburgh. I'm glad the historical colonization mod is working, preventing awful border gore. Sri Lanka is a very good launching point for full control over India because very few of the Indian states will build a powerful navy. So they can't really get at you if you're using that as your foothold. Okay, we got more colon. We're gonna definitely go with the free colonists. That's the best one because it allows us to go toe to toe with Spain in the colonization game. Also, Sri Lanka is absurdly valuable. That is correct. Yeah, that's about as much as they'll get. But if you're, and that might be a problem for other European states, but as England, that is not going to be a problem. Yeah, and that's the other thing is oftentimes you'll see some real powerhouses show up in India. Like, let me see. Usually one or two of them show up on the Great Powers. Not right now, but usually, like, oftentimes you'll see either Bahamanis or Vijayanagar sort of eat one another, and then you have this massive power in southern India that is almost insurmountable unless you're playing like a France or a Prussia. But we are building a sizable Atlantic empire right now. Yeah, once the European powers really get going, the Indian states usually can't catch up. Especially once the transatlantic trade starts going and they start having American colonies show up. Also, this war between Spain and France has been going on for so long. Oh, okay, that's why it's the League Wars. That's why I'm chugging. The League Wars are happening. Okay, that makes much more sense. Also, that is true. If they made India play a bit more like China, they would be a bit more realistic. But at least now I know why my computer's chugging. It's the League War. Yeah, I would say that France has definitely replaced the Ottomans as the final boss. French ideas are just too good. Nobody else can compete. Granada got released. How did that happen? They're a vassal of Spain. I'm gonna have to do some more fixing the map next time, aren't I? This is gonna be disgusting when the League Wars are over. And even then, it's gotten very difficult to do that with how the war plays out now. Yeah, no. France's ideas are just that absurdly powerful. What are we taking? Let's go with quality. What's going on? Deal with that later. Take the money. France pieced out. That is just gross. I hate it. Yuck. The border gore is just disgusting. This is worse than some CK2 games I've played. Saxony's looking thick. So is Bavaria. The Three Leagues has eaten half of Switzerland. I imagine that once it eats the rest, it'll just form Switzerland again. Okay, I think I'm gonna call it about there tonight because it's moving very slow. So, thank you all for turning out for the stream. This Rule Britannia game will continue next weekend, Sunday at 8. Tune in on Friday for Crusader Kings or multiplayer. I do either. So, thank you for turning out. This is Renegade Historian signing off. Have a great night, everybody.